Hello everyone, Kurtupo here with part 2 of a series on why I think the Raichu from Burning Shadows should be banned from the expanded format of the Pokémon Trading Card Game. If you are new to this series, please check in the description down below. I have a link to the playlist with this series in the episodes in order, so please check that out if you haven't done so already. And in today's episode, we'll be taking a look at the Looker Lock build. That's the Oranguru deck with Mars. No, I'm just kidding. Today we're actually taking a look at Sableye, the Junk Hunt Sableye specifically. And there's a reason for that. You guys brought up a number of concerns, and so rather than starting with the deck that I personally think is the weakest of the bunch, I decided to instead start off with a strong deck. It'll be kind of awkward because I'll have to be front loading a lot of information. I've tried my best to push that towards the towards the end of this video. But there were some concerns, and most of them were just, doesn't X card exist in the expanded format? Doesn't it kind of ruin the whole point of our deck? And so I just kind of want to catalog a lot of those concerns because I don't think I'll be able to fully convince you that these aren't as big a problem as they see in this video, but my hope is that when you watch the other videos, specifically the ones where we actually show off some gameplay of the decks, you guys will not be as worried as before. So the most common complaint, I suppose, was Guzma and Versus Seeker are very popular in the expanded format. Everyone has their choice of either Lysander or Guzma, and more people choose Guzma. And pretty much every deck has 4 copies of Versus Seeker. It's just such a good card. And in combination, it makes it seem like every single deck in the expanded format is equipped to deal with our own. In addition, some of you pointed out the existence of Keldeo EX and Donwing's Necrozma GX. They both have an ability that basically lets you switch it with your active Pokemon. And since that's an ability that does bypass paralysis, no one actually pointed this out, but Garbotoxin from Garbodor and Trevenant do kind of put a wrench in our plans. More so Trevenant. With Garbodor, we can just get rid of the necessary tool, the tool that is needed to be attached to Garbodor in order to activate Garbotoxin and therefore deactivate EvoShock. With Trevenant, I will concede that's basically an auto loss, because in order to bypass Trevenant's ability, we would need both Versus Seeker and Pokemon Ranger in our hand, and if we're doing that every single turn, then we're not playing any control cards, and therefore it's only a matter of time until the Trevenant player wins. So that's really our only auto loss, but no one pointed that out, so I thought that was a bit interesting. And lastly, a lot of you pointed out just random switching and healing cards. I know in Standard everyone runs Jirachi, and therefore everyone runs a Skateboard. But in the expanded format, Skateboard in particular is not very common, mostly because we have Floatstone. But some people do run it, and I just wanted to kind of put all these concerns, all these cards that do cause us problems, because we do have a way of dealing with them. I thought about this, guys. We don't just stand there and hope our opponent doesn't have enough healing cards. Like, we thought about this, and so that's kind of something I'm going to address in the later portion of this video. But let's move on ahead to the deck list. This entire deck revolves around Raichu, but we activate Raichu's ability through Sableye, and Sableye has the Junk Hunt attack. For 1 Darkness Energy, you can put 2 item cards from your discard pile into your hand, and in the expanded format, item card, the ability to grab an item card essentially means the ability to grab any card. If we wanted to grab a Pokemon, we could grab a Pokeball or a Rescue Stretcher if we wanted to get it from our deck, or discard pile respectively. If we want to grab a supporter, we could do so with Random Receiver or Versus Seeker. Random Receiver, not the best card because you don't get to choose which supporter you get, but it's better than Pokegear. And Versus Seeker, again, is a really phenomenal card, and there's reason why most decks play 4 of it. And of course, if you want to grab energy from your deck, you could do so from Professor's Letter, and if you want to grab energy from your discard pile, you have a number of options, most notably energy retrieval. And if you want to grab a stadium, well, you're kind of out of luck, really. The best stadium retrieval from your deck is Stadium Nab, of all things. And there isn't even a way to grab stadiums from your discard pile unless you use Dowsing Machine, which is a bit of a waste. Well, in most decks it's a bit of a waste, but especially in a Junk Hunt deck. So please do not plan your strategies around stadium cards. We don't do that, and I would suggest you don't otherwise, and I hope you can realize why. But the whole point of that was to show that Junk Hunt is a really powerful attack, although most of the time we will be grabbing Devolution Spray, and then if we need a setup card, we'll grab that, or we'll just grab a control card, and that will usually be Trick Shovel. Now we'll talk about the role Trick Shovel plays in our deck later, but just letting you know, just a heads up, we're usually going to be grabbing Devolution Spray and Trick Shovel. So let's move on to the core cards of the deck. First we have the Pokemon. We run a full playset, 4 copies of Sableye. We run 3 Pikachu and then 2 Raichu. I'll talk about why we chose this Pikachu in particular a bit later. But the interesting thing to note here is that I have 3 Pikachu but only 2 Raichu. That's because we always want to have 2 Pikachu on our bench. We only need 1 to start with, but ideally we would have 2 throughout the entire game, whereas with Raichu we only need 1 copy of Raichu throughout the entire game, so that's why there's a bit of an imbalance here. Also, I'm just paranoid about prizing, and you'll see that through the rest of this deck build. That's just how I play. As a player, my play style is I don't like prizing cards. And of course, in order to use the Junk Hunt attack, we do need energy. We run 4 basic darkness energy, nothing fancy. The Junk Hunt attack is very cheap, only needing that 1 energy. And again, since most of the game, we'll only need 1, maybe 2 darkness energy, because we can always get item cards from our discard pile via Sableye's Junk Hunt attack. So we can get away with a very low energy count. You could probably even get away with 3. Again, I'm paranoid about pricing, so I have 4. But you could definitely only have 3 darkness energy and still be good to go. And then lastly, we have our miscellaneous core cards. Devolution Spray, of course, that's how we start this Raichu loop in the beginning, or to begin with, excuse me. And then lastly, we have Trick Shovel. Trick Shovel is not really a core card. I just considered it part of our core strategy, and that's why I put it here. But we don't need Trick Shovel to start the game. And throughout this video, and definitely throughout the series of videos, I'll be talking about starting conditions. And so the starting condition is basically the board state we need in order to get our combo going. For this deck, it's a pretty small board state. We just need Sableye in our active with the required Darkness Energy, Pikachu on our bench, Raichu in our hand, and Devolution Spray in our hand. And the nice thing about this is that we don't really need all of that on the first turn of the game. The only card we really need is that Pikachu, because we need to have Pikachu on the field turn 1 so we can evolve into Raichu turn 2, but obviously we don't need to evolve Raichu, and therefore we don't need Devolution Spray either until the second turn of the game. So it's a pretty light, and that's really one of the strengths of this deck, is we don't need a whole lot to get going. And so because of that, we're able to dedicate almost the entirety of our deck to consistency cards. So let's move on to those. First of all, we have the supporter cards and the supporter support, as it were. We run a full playset, 4 copies of Green's Exploration. You get to search your deck for any 2 trainer cards. Again, being able to search your deck for any 2 item cards, and Green says trainer cards, but it's really just item cards we're going to be grabbing most of the time. Greens in the expanded format is basically grab any 2 cards from our deck, and of course that's pretty powerful, especially when we only need a handful of cards to begin with. So that's why we have a full play set of them. They're just really good. I do run a copy of Gladion. Again, I'm very paranoid about pricing. If you're feeling a bit more risky than I am, which is totally fine, you could totally cut Gladion, especially since we do run a full play set for copies of Random Receiver. A bit of an interesting pick. Because we don't have that many cards as part of our starting conditions, grabbing the greens usually means we're good for the rest of the game, and so we want to maximize our chances to grab greens, so Random Receiver acts as our 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th greens. Obviously, since we run Gladion, there is a small chance that we will grab that as well, but hey, Gladion's not that bad. It's basically look at the top 6 cards of your deck and take one. But again, if you don't like Gladion, you could totally drop it and Random Receiver becomes a guaranteed greens exploration. Since our deck is very one-dimensional in terms of interactivity, usually it's our opponent either has an answer or they don't. Besides, a smart opponent will know what's up with our deck the moment Pikachu hits the bench, so we don't mind revealing information via Random Receiver. Then we have Versus Seeker, again a very powerful card. We don't run 4 copies of Versus Seeker, we only run 2, and again that's because we only need to grab the greens once to get set up most of the time, and even if we needed to grab more greens than are in our deck or through Random Receiver, we can always get Versus Seeker back through Junk Hunt. So we really only play like 1 Versus Seeker in the entire game, but again, I'm paranoid about pricing, so we only have 2 of them. Then we have our Pokemon Search. We do run 4 Level Ball. Pikachu and Sableye both fit the criteria of having 90 HP or less, so we can search those out for Level Ball. And again, it's crucial that we get Pikachu out on turn 1, so that's why you run a full playset of them. Then we have the Master Ball as our ace spec of choice, a very interesting card. I personally don't like discarding cards from our starting hand, especially since we really do need to get Raichu out on turn 2, and Master Ball and Ultra Ball are our only ways of searching out Raichu. If you wish, you could replace Master Ball with Computer Search. I just don't feel too comfortable doing that, but obviously different strokes for different folks, and you could definitely replace Master Ball with Computer Search. Then we have the 2 Ultra Ball. I kind of mentioned Ultra Ball and Master Ball are only ways of grabbing Raichu, but I'm also paranoid about prizing. There's nothing worse than prizing the 1 Master Ball in your entire deck and not being able to grab out Raichu. So that's why we have 2 Ultra Ball. They're kind of extra Master Balls in case the Master Ball is prized. And then lastly, we have 2 Rescue Stretcher. Rescue Stretcher, the premier Pokemon retrieval from your discard pile. It's mostly here just to make sure we can grab a Pokemon back through our discard pile via Sableye's Junk Hunt attack, but we could also play it in combination with Battle Compressor, and I'll talk about that a bit more later, in order to basically search out any Pokemon in our deck. Then we have the energy cards. Not a whole lot going on here, and that's because we only really need 1, maybe 2 energy cards in the entire deck. We run 2 Professor's Letter. That's just so if need be, we could grab essentially an energy card with greens. I run 2 of them because, once again, I'm very paranoid about prizing, but if you really want to, you could easily only run 1. Then we have Energy Retrieval and Energy Recycle System to get energy from our discard pile. That's usually what we're going to be using once we get our combo going. Energy will probably end up in the discard pile more often than in our hand. Interesting that we run 1 Energy Retrieval and 1 Energy Recycle System instead of 2 of either. There is a reason for that. I'll talk about it a bit later. I'll talk about it later. And then in terms of miscellaneous consistency, we do run 4 Acrobike. Acrobike's just a really good card. We run 4 Trainer's Mail. Trainer's Mail is an even better card. I recommend you run 4 of them in any expanded deck because it's just so good. And then we have Battle Compressor. Again, if an item card is in our discard pile, we can grab it later with Sableye. And so even though Battle Compressor doesn't draw us cards, it can basically allow us to get it through Sableye's Junk Hunt attack. We only really use 1 Battle Compressor each game, which is why we only run 2, because again, I'm paranoid about pricing, but you could drop it to 1 if you so wish. And then we move on to our tech cards. First up, we have the Stadiums, Power Plant, and Silent Lab. Both of them basically do the same thing, which is shut down EX Pokemon and basic GX Pokemon, notably Shaman, Tapu Lele, Dedenne, etc., in addition to Keldeo EX and Dawn Wings Necrozma GX, which I mentioned earlier in the video. Their ability will get around paralysis, and so either Power Plant or Silent Lab will shut them down. It's really a matter of preference which one you want to use. I personally prefer Silent Lab, but Power Plant is the only thing that shuts down Zoroark GX, which is of course very popular in the expanded format, but not obviously. But Silent Lab singular also shuts down things like Jirachi Prism Star and Jirachi Prism Star, Stellar Wish Jirachi, which is not a Prism Star card, but also shuts down things like Volcanion Prism Star and also Ditto Prism Star. Again, it's more a matter of preference because Power Plant and Silent Lab have a lot of overlap between each other. But I personally like running having a 1-1 split. I don't feel very comfortable running only 1 of either stadium just because we don't have any way to retrieve stadiums. But we only really need 2 because we can get rid of opposing stadiums with Field Blower. Field Blower is only here to get rid of problematic stadiums that are not Prism Star cards, i.e. just Steel Shelter. I think I'll try to... I don't think there's any other stadiums we really want to get rid of, but we can also get rid of tool cards, which is especially important for the Garbo-Toxin matchup. But both of those things aren't very common, and so that's why we only run 1 Field Blower. The chances of us running into a Garbo-Toxin deck and having Field Blower prize are very low, and in my opinion not worth running a 2nd Field Blower, but you could totally do that if you so wish. We then have Devolution Spray Z, definitely probably the most interesting card in this deck, and it essentially serves 2 functions. The first one is an emergency Devolution Spray. It can also act as an extra Trick Shovel. If you have no idea what that means, I don't blame you. Don't worry, we'll talk about it later. But more importantly, Devolution Spray Z allows us to not be milled, because if we don't have any cards in our deck, we can play Devolution Spray Z instead of regular Devolution Spray. Raichu will be shuffled into the deck, and then at the start of our next turn, we'll draw that Raichu and we can repeat it again, and we'll never be milled. We just have to remember to actually have Devolution Spray in our hand on the turn where we only have 0 cards in our deck. And then lastly, we have 2 U-Turn Board. U-Turn Board is a bit of a rarity when it comes to Raichu decks. Most people, including myself, like to run Switch instead. Since we only have 1 Pokemon that can really make use of U-Turn Board, which is Pikachu. We don't want to attach U-Turn Board with Sableye because we always want to have Sableye in the active, but we always want to have 2 Pikachu on our bench, so that's why we only have 2 U-Turn Board. It's only really here in case an opponent Lysanders in a Pikachu. Obviously, if they have Guzma, it's usually going to be because they take a KO. And so, again, not a card we're going to be, that's not going to have practical use very often. And so that's why we only have 2 of them, 1 for each Pikachu we will have on our bench. So here's the entire deck list, just put out visually by category. Unfortunately, I put Devolution Spray up to the and Trick Shovel, to the right, just because if I put them at the top, then we wouldn't have space for the supported cards. But there's that. And so some possible tweaks you could make, more like a lot of tweaks you could make, are those concerning prizing paranoia. I, of course, hate the idea of having a chance to prize something very important. I know some people don't care about that, so if you don't care about that, you're free to cut Gladian and cut a lot of those cards where we have 3 of or 2 of, just because of that. You could also definitely replace Master Ball with Computer Search. I imagine that's going to be the most popular tweak. You could also have more stadiums, Again, we have no way to retrieve our stadiums, so if you are concerned about losing the Stadium War, you can definitely grab an extra Silent Lab or an extra Power Plant. You could also add EX or GX Pokemon, such as Shaman EX or Tapu Lele GX, although now that I think about it, it would probably be better to put Jirachi EX, because you could grab that with Level Ball. We're running 4 of them. Anyways, personally, I don't like the idea of putting 2 prize card Pokemon in our deck. It's basically the equivalent of just handing an opponent a Guzma, because they'll take an extra prize card. But, and I feel that our deck is consistent enough to get greens early on. But if you really want to be super duper consistent, you could totally add in Tapu Lele or Jirachi. And so I kind of want to spend this rest of the video talking about some of the theory behind this deck. This is kind of where I imagine an unnecessarily large amount of the video will be headed towards, but that kind of comes with the territory of starting off with a very strong deck with a lot of nuances. And so the first kind of bit of, not theory per se, but this is something that's going to apply to every deck moving forward, and that is which Pikachu we choose. Obviously, we have the Raichu locked in, it's that Evo Shock one, but when it comes to choosing which Pikachu you want to run, you really have 2 options. You can choose either a 60 HP Pikachu or a 70 HP Pikachu. And so you might be saying, hey Kurtupo, what is the question there? Obviously you want to choose the 70 HP Pikachu. It has more HP, which means it needs to take more hits to be KO'd, and you're absolutely right. It turns Buzzwole GX's Jet Punch attack from a 1-hit KO to a 2-hit KO, or from a 2-hit KO to a 3-hit KO if Pikachu is on the bench. Same story with Pheromosa and Buzzwole GX. Also the same with the Greninja, the Water Shuriken one, although I would argue that if your opponent has set up Greninja, you're probably in... I don't think 70 HP Pikachu is going to help you that much. You probably already lost that point. But every little bit helps. And so the question now is, what is the benefit to running a 60 HP Pikachu then? And the answer is you get access to pretty much every other Pikachu in the expanded format. 70 HP Pikachu are only in the most recent sets, becoming a thing. You could draw cards, you could have coin flip shenanigans. My favorite is that X and Y one with the Nuzzle attack. You just flip a coin, and if heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is paralyzed. A very good card. Obviously, I don't think the benefits to a 60 HP Pikachu are worth the drop in hit points. The jump from 60 to 70 really does make a difference. And so the reason is, well, if you check the list, of 70 HP Pikachu, there will be a clear winner in which one you should run, and it's going to be the Promo Pikachu. There's 2 of them, they're both reprints of each other, and that's the one with the Thunder Wave attack for 1 lightning energy. And so the question is, why aren't we running that? Why are we running this common card from Unified Minds? And there's 2 reasons, as you can see on the screen. The first is that the Thunder Wave Pikachu does need a lightning energy, so we can only really take advantage of it in a deck that already uses lightning energy, which is none of the decks I will be showcasing on this series, or in a deck that can afford to run multiple energy types. And so for the majority of decks, maybe all of them, I need to double check that, but I believe for the majority of decks, we aren't going to be running multiple energies just for the chance to use the Thunder Wave attack. Pikachu is literally the last card we want to leave in the active for an opponent to pick off. If a Pikachu is going to get KO'd, it's going to be because our opponent deliberately chose to through the effect of something like Guzma. Excuse me. So that's the main reason why, but also there's just the financial portion. Of course, it being a promo is a lot harder to get a hold of. Even though there's two of them, it's infinitely harder to get a hold of than the common card from Unified Minds that everyone has an excess of sitting in their closet, and if you don't, you definitely know someone who does. So here comes probably the most complicated part of the video. I wouldn't blame you if even after this explanation you're still confused, and if you are, I would just say wait till we actually start playing games and this will probably become more clear. But this is trick shovel theory, and this is kind of the thought process behind playing trick shovel and what we want to do most of the time. And so the first thing we want to go over is controlling our opponent's draws. So if you play Magic the Gathering, in particular the modern format, you might be familiar with a deck archetype, called Lantern Control, and that's kind of what we become. Obviously very different, not only are Pokemon and Magic very different games, but unlike in Magic, we're not offensive at all, but it's a very similar concept in the fact that we basically control what our opponent can draw. And so whenever we play Trick Shovel, we look at the top card of our opponent's deck, and if it's a useless card, such as a basic energy or a evolution Pokemon or something, unless it evolves from their active Pokemon, then we kind of let them have it. Say, oh, that's a nice card, but it won't help our opponent to break paralysis, so we let them have it. And when we look at the top card of our opponent's deck, we reveal something that would allow them to break out of paralysis, such as Guzma, we immediately discard that card. And if we reveal, or not reveal because our opponent won't know what it is until we draw it, but if we see a card that will allow our opponent to gain unsupervised cards, such as with How, if we let them have it, they would then draw 3 cards, and we wouldn't know what those 3 cards are. So even though How by itself does not break paralysis, it could potentially let them draw something, and that's information we don't know, and as a control deck, we want to know everything our opponent is doing, and so we will try our best to limit and keep track of what I call unsupervised cards. So we will have to be paying attention during our opponent's turn, see what cards they play, kind of keep track of what they had at the very beginning of the game, and if we let them draw cards unsupervised, say we don't feel comfortable with discarding How for some reason, not that many people are playing How anyway, then that is something we would have to keep track of. And so let's just go through a small example scenario, and I kind of listed down what our thought process is. If it's a useless card, we keep it there, and if it's an out or would generate unsupervised cards, we would then discard it. So let's say using Trick Shovel, we reveal a basic energy, we immediately discard it. And if when we play Trick Shovel, we reveal Versus Seeker, we would immediately discard that as well, because that means our opponent could use it with Guzma later. And so you can probably see a problem with this not mindset, but this game plan, and that is, what if our opponent would draw multiple outs in a row? What if the top card is Versus Seeker, and we discard that, but then the very next card is a Guzma? We still let them have another card. Now, statistically, that's not very likely. I'm not going to do the math off the top of my head right now, but it's not very likely. But over many games and over many draws, it is entirely possible that our opponent will draw 2 outs in a row. And so how do we solve this problem? Easy. Just use multiple Trick Shovels. And so by having 2 Trick Shovels in our hand, you can do basic math here. Our opponent would need a 1 it basically has a 1 in, what is the math? I said basic math, and it's not that basic, but they would need to draw 3 outs in a row, which is particularly difficult considering our opponent usually has around, depending on the type of deck, 4 to 8 outs. Of course, the majority of their deck could be those kinds of cards that allow them to gain unsupervised cards, such as Trainer's Mail, or, well, mostly just Trainer's Mail most of the time, or cards that would let them draw or shuffle, such as Cynthia, etc. And so we would want to get rid of that, and the reason we can, not the reason, but the way we're able to kind of make sure our opponent doesn't draw anything that would help them break out of the combo is through playing multiple trick shovels. Now, there's obviously a huge problem with that, and that is the fact that Sableye only allows us to grab 2 item cards in a single turn, so one of them has to be Devolution Spray, and the other is the Trick Shovel. So where are we going to get the second or maybe third or fourth Trick Shovel from? And there's 2 ways to do so. We can either just draw into it / search them from something like greens. If there's just a greens sitting in our hand and we already have our combo going, then we can just use greens, grab more Trick Shovels. But we could also substitute Devolution Spray for Trick Shovel. So if we have 2 Devolution Spray cards in our hand, we could easily forego one of them by instead grabbing 2 Trick Shovels with Sableye's Junk Hunt attack instead of a Devolution Spray and a Trick Shovel. And lastly, a kind of a side note, Devolution Spray Z can also replace Devolution Spray as well, because up until the last turn of, not the last turn of the game, excuse me, but up until our last draw of our deck, we absolutely need a Devolution Spray in our hand. But once we have 0 cards in our hand, we start using Devolution Spray. Therefore, that Devolution, or excuse me, kind of complicated here. Once there are no more cards in our deck, we can instead use Devolution Spray Z, and that will be shuffling Raichu into our deck. And as I mentioned before, that creates an infinite loop where we'll never be milled. And the original Devolution Spray we were using throughout the entire game can now be sacrificed in order to get an extra Trick Shovel. And so that was all kind of complicated. I imagine I did not explain that too well, but I'm hoping once we get to the games where I show off the deck, you'll get a better understanding of this Trick Shovel theory. So just kind of a recap, because it was definitely a long episode, a bit longer than I intended to. First, we looked at the possible problems for just Raichu decks in general, and so I'm asking that as we play these games, you look out for how we deal with them, or perhaps how we don't deal with them, because some of these decks, this deck included, are less equipped to deal with certain threats. Then we looked at the deck list. We but we emphasized the idea of a starting condition, and one of the strengths of this deck is that we don't have a lot of starting conditions. This deck is mostly consistency cards, which is really good, especially in expanded format. And then lastly, we went over the tech cards and tweaks that you could do if you don't agree necessarily with my deck building decisions. And then we went over the Pikachu we decided to use. For the majority of the time, we will have that 70 HP Pikachu, that common card from Unified Minds, but of course, if you do not agree / have the budget to do so, you could definitely pick up that promo Pikachu if you so wish. And then lastly, we looked at probably the most complicated part of our video, the Trick Shovel theory. So what's next? There should be a gameplay video, probably multiple videos, releasing alongside this video, even if they're, or not even if they're not, because they are going to, but a link to that should be in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube. Afterwards, there will be a deck analysis video. That's going to come out later, just because if I try and launch that alongside the other videos, this video will probably take a while to get out there, and much of the idea surrounding these series is that I get these out as soon as possible. And I'll talk about this a bit more once I release the deck analysis, but I really am gonna try and push for you guys to decide which deck we cover next. Oh, now that I think about it, I don't believe this deck specifically was on the original video. That's totally on me, guys. But just know that this deck is kind of a middle ground between the Starmie deck and the Team Rocket's Handiwork deck. But you can go back to the first video in the series, take a look at the deck archetypes I have, and you can decide which one you would like to see next. I would recommend that you guys kind of tell me which aspects of Raichu decks, or if you're wondering how a specific deck works, concerns, how does this deck beat this thing, whatever it is, let me know down below in the comment section or on the Reddit post or somewhere on the internet, and I will find it. And yeah, that's kind of it. I'm trying to think. I feel like I'm missing something. Oh well, I'll edit it in later if I remember. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video where we play some games. Until then, take care.